Governor Edwards and Secretary of the Department of Corrections, Jimmy LeBlanc, are in Washington, D.C. today to tell Capitol Hill about the Louisiana Justice Reinvestment Act. That's a bill that the legislature in Louisiana passed at the suggestion of Governor Edwards, which lets criminals go free early in order to save money. Now, regardless of how you feel about the act, and Louisianians have mixed feelings about it, I think it's important to tell the other side of this story, and that is that in my judgment and in the judgment of many, many Louisianians, and it gives me no joy in saying this, but our Louisiana Department of Corrections is utterly incompetent to administer this piece of legislation. And I say that based on the facts. Let's just look at the facts. In the last 2 years, I don't know how many wardens and senior personnel in our prisons administered by the Department of Corrections have been indicted or gone to jail for stealing from the taxpayers or stealing from the prisoners. And you know what the Department of Corrections has done in response to that? Nothing. Zero. Nada. Recently, Channel 2 in Baton Rouge broke a story where the Department of Corrections, through one of its prisons, was letting 12 inmates out during the day. Now, these were hardened criminals, some of them sexual offenders. They were letting them out to go play music to nursing homes and, even worse, to children in parks. Now, these are kids that these sexual predators, some of them, are being allowed to mingle with. And the only reason we know about it is because Channel 2 in Baton Rouge did an investigation. Number three, the legislative auditor recently did an audit. He criticized the Department of Corrections for doing a no-bid contract to build a building in Baton Rouge, $6.3 million of taxpayer money, and it just so happens that one of the people making money off the building is married to the secretary's niece. Now, you know what happened? Nothing, zero, nada in terms of consequences. Let's talk about state police. The Department of Corrections is in charge of state police. In the last few years, we've seen a state police superintendent caught trying to pass a bill in the legislature to pad his retirement. We've seen a number of state troopers caught spending taxpayer money to take trips to Las Vegas and the Grand Canyon. We just saw a report on Fox 8 in New Orleans where the Fox 8 reporters went undercover. They caught a bunch of troopers padding their timesheets. One of the troopers was making over $200,000 a year taxpayer money. Let's look at the act, the Louisiana Justice Reinvestment Act. This was a bill that the governor and the Secretary of the Department of Corrections encouraged the legislature to pass, and it did, which lets criminals go early in return for saving money. We've got about 35,000 prisoners in Louisiana. Under this act, the Department of the Corrections, with its demonstrated incompetence, is going to review half of those prisoners, 16,000, for early release. The Louisiana Legislative Auditor just did a report criticizing harshly the Department of Corrections. It said the Department of Corrections can't even tell taxpayers or the people in Louisiana where all its prisoners are. They don't know which prisons they're in. The legislative auditor also criticized the Department of Corrections for not being able to compute with accuracy the release dates for the prisoners. And yet they're going to be in charge of deciding which prisoners to release into our communities to save money. The Department of Corrections has already turned loose about 1,900 criminals. And just as you would imagine and could be predicted, a bunch of them have already come back. There was a case in Kenner where a convicted car thief and burglar serving 12 years, He was released under this new act. Within a week, he held up a construction worker at gunpoint. And then he went right back to prison. We find out later that he had 64 counts of burglary against him in the past. In North Louisiana, in Wynn Parish, a prisoner was released early in order to save money under the governor's new program. He had been in and out of prison for 10 years. Within a week, he was rearrested and sent back. The sheriff up there called the program a joke. Now, I've talked to countless district attorneys, countless sheriffs who are scared to death of this legislation, not for themselves, but for the people they're sworn to protect, for Louisianians. I am not against giving people second chances. I'm not against trying to rehabilitate prisoners. But I am against depending upon our Department of Corrections, with its demonstrated incompetence, time and time and time again, being put in charge of deciding which criminals, some of them murderers, some of them sexual predators, they're going to release onto the public Louisiana in order to save money, which will probably go into the black hole of the general fund in Baton Rouge and be wasted anyway. You know, there's some things that money can't buy, and one of them is public safety. And the first job of government is to protect its people. Not run their lives, but to protect its people. Now, while the governor and Secretary LeBlanc are here in Washington, D.C., telling everybody how wonderful this act is, which lets prisoners go in order to try to save money, and I hope it does work out, the people of Washington, D.C. and the people of Louisiana are entitled to hear the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is that the Louisiana Department of Corrections, based on its past actions, it is utterly incompetent, utterly unable to administer this act and to decide which of these violent criminals go free. And they've already made mistake after mistake after mistake.